Bram Stoker's Dracula. Obviously, we are now onto the penultimate chapter, and things start to speed up. So it's in not much more than the previous chapter, but there is certainly more action than there was in chapter 25. Again, remember that you need to be able to analyze the text in detail and think about the text and the techniques the authors use. So of course you are looking at the use of the narrative, the use of perspective, how time is perceived in the text, the viewpoints. We're looking at the use of foreshadowing. We're looking at the creation of male stereotypes, female stereotypes. Because remember, when you compare this to your modern text, you aren't comparing the story or the plot. You're exploring the technique. You're comparing the techniques the authors use to create a spooky, gothic, supernatural tale. So, chapter 26 sees the group of enlightened people, our merry band, travel towards Galatz. Mina makes some important connections, and the group divides into three to attack Dracula from different directions. And forethought. So the closing chapters suggest a type of chase novel. So it's becoming now more action-filled, and the good guys are pursuing evil, and evil seems to constantly elude them. Even at the end of the novel, we get the sense that Dracula will escape, and in fact, some have criticized Stoker for having drawn out this last half of the novel. But again, it was written at the end of the Victorian period, when reading public expected novels to last a long time. So although he's been criticized for dragging it out, he was very likely pandering to his audience, which makes sense, especially should you plan to sell a text and make money off it. So we'll now start this chapter 26 with Seward's diary. It's the 29th of October. Seward records, obviously, that Mina, under hypnosis, can hear and distinguish very little, and what she does hear, mostly like the sound of mooing cattle or lowing cattle, indicates that Dracula is now off the sea and his coffin is being moved upriver. As the closer they get to Galatz, the harder it becomes for Van Helsing to hypnotize Mina, and because of the lack of connection Mina has, or direct connection she has with Dracula, we do see that her evidence and her explanations start to become a little bit confusing. So basically, Mina says, "I can see nothing." Okay, so her telepathic link to the villain is weakening, so she's not able to produce as much detail as she previously has, and as much detail as Van Helsing would like. And the closer they get to Castle Dracula, it seems, the harder it is for Mina to succumb. And as we go through the next, there's a repetition of this. The hypnotic stage was even longer than before. Mrs. Harker yielded to the hypnotic influence even less readily than this morning. There's an increasing difficulty of procuring the hypnotic trance. So as the link is becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. We then move on, and we look at Jonathan Harker's journal, which is written on the 30th of October, and he records that the captain of the ship which brought Dracula to Galatz, he talks about how unusual the journey was from London, and he talks about how many of the Romanians on board the ship wanted to throw the boxes overboard, but of course the captain, whose name was Donaldson, feels that he has been commissioned to deliver the cargo, and therefore feels obligated, so he won't let them do this. And he's the second ship's captain, Donaldson. He's Scottish, And again, we see this, by the way, that Stoker has spelt his speech. So he spelt it so that when you read it, you get the idea of the accent. Okay. Why? Well, the speech, I think, makes the captain seem very theatrical. And of course, what is his main purpose in this text? Because he's definitely a flat character and a very small role, but he's there to provide plot exposition for the landing of Dracula in his homeland. So he is there to tell the story. He is there to explain that the Romanians came and asked him to heave overboard a big box. He goes on to talk about a receipt signed by Emanuel Hildesheim. Interesting choice of words. Manuel means God is with us. Hildesheim is a very Jewish sounding name. Again, maybe in terms of looking at this text as a text which explores xenophobia and fear of infiltration of different cultures towards the end of the Victorian period and growing up towards the 1930s, Jews were looked upon in a very negative light. They were regarded as very good businessmen, and people out of misunderstanding, obviously, and out of jealousy, it is believed that a lot of this anti-Semitism, which was absolutely shocking, arose. Perhaps Stoker is demonstrating his own portion of anti-Semitism, or perhaps he is highlighting that the Jews are a group of people who were, even in Victorian times and before that, were persecuted. But Emanuel Hildesheim receives the box, and then he's got it from the captain, then he gives it over to a Slovak called Petrov Skinsky. Now, Skinsky is quite a harsh sounding name if you use the K sound, and gives the impression of somebody who is not very trustworthy. He sounds sneaky. He sounds like he's up to no good. But again, by putting the ski on the end, it is using the stereotype of Eastern European surnames, and this is preceded by the Russian version of the Russianization of the name Peter, which is Petrov. Okay. Interestingly, Petrov Skinsky is found dead in a churchyard, his throat apparently opened by a wild animal, probably a wolf. We, of course, believe that it is the doing of Dracula. So Skinsky takes the box of earth. He's now got it on land. At night, of course, Dracula is able, because he's no longer on water, to come out of his coffin and attack and kill Skinsky. And of course, therefore, there are no witnesses. The men now decide to discuss their plans towards Dracula and include Mina. So Jonathan at this point is released from his promise to his wife. Remember, his promise was that he wasn't to divulge what they were talking about to Mina, and this was creating a rift in their marriage, because it was all about trust and the idea that they couldn't talk to one another, they couldn't communicate. So this is the fact that she is no longer in communication, or in such close communication with Dracula, allows her to communicate more clearly with her husband. So we move on to Mina Harker's journal on the 30th of October, the same day. She's typing up all that's happened so far. She's read all the diary entries. She's consulted all the maps and the waterways. And she concludes that Dracula will have to take the river to Sereth, which is then joined to the Brestrica River, which of course will lead them to the Borgo Pass, where of course Jonathan stopped at the beginning of the novel. So again, the novel is going full circle. Interestingly, she talks about how she got to know all these maps by studying them when Jonathan did go out to visit Dracula right at the beginning. In fact, she even enters in her journal a memorandum, so it's a note. It's not a personal thing. She has now sat down and the trail is literally gone cold. Literally and figuratively, it's gone cold because, of course, they can't find him, but also it's cold because it's winter and it's snowing. And Mina is the one who sits down and applies logical thinking. So what is happening? What did I hear? What direction is he going? And of course, logical thinking is regarded as a masculine trait. So again, we see Mina being encapsulating the best of both worlds. She is the best of the female in that she's motherly, she's nurturing, she's lovely, and at the same time she has these masculine traits. She's logically thinking, and she's problem solving, and she's the one who offers up the solution. Again, we are reminded that she's had access to all the information and she's clearly studied it, and we are again reminded that she's not stupid. She's very intelligent because she's managed to bring all this knowledge of rail timetables, all the maps she read, all the rivers she studied, and she's the one who's brought together and this information together, and she has talked about the Count's options and where he is going. Okay. Once she's finished this, of course, everyone is really happy with it. In fact, Jonathan takes her into his arms and gives her a kiss. Van Helsing describes her as our teacher, which of course is high praise, considering that Van Helsing is a professor and he is a man of great knowledge. So this is very, very high praise indeed. They now decide to split up. Jonathan is obviously really scared about his wife's safety, but it is at this point they have to decide to put things in God's hands. Now, this is all very interesting because there doesn't seem to be a majorly, the gentlemen don't seem to be very religious at the onset of the novel. However, it's the idea that the supernatural, and remember, God falls into the supernatural because it's something that goes beyond the natural and is not explainable. And I think perhaps they've got to a point where, well, look, if we can believe in vampires, then clearly we can believe in God. So it seems that their faith is becoming stronger, and they're having to trust, and they're having to place their life into the hands of an entity they don't see, and they're having to have faith. Again, a reminder that Van Helsing has a huge influence on this because he is very vocal about his faith, and he is a Catholic. So the group decide to split up. Seward and Quincy are going off together, and they're going on horseback. Arthur and Jonathan, they're teaming up, and they're going by steamboat. And Mina and Van Helsing are teaming up, and they're heading off by train. Okay, and like I say, as Jonathan says, we are in the hands of God. Mina is again, she talks about how can women help loving men when they are so earnest and so true and so brave. And too, it made me think of the wonderful power of money. So Mina fulfills a stereotype. She sits and thinks about the alpha male and the importance of money. And we are reminded, and I'm going to remind you again, that she is the feminine ideal. So Mina, the character, is resourceful. We see she's caring, she's well organized, and the men can't find any fault with her. Interesting to note that at no point is she described as a beauty, and it seems to be the impression that you are either beautiful and loose and lacking in moral fiber, or you are plain looking, resourceful, caring, well organized, and the ideal woman. Okay. Van Helsing, who's the epitome of wisdom and knowledge, even praises her. He's described her on a number of occasions as so clever. In chapter 14, he described her as a pearl among women. And it's evident that he appreciates her intelligence, and he even comments on the fact that she has male qualities. If you remember in chapter 18, he says something about a brain that a man should have were he much gifted. So obviously we as a modern reader are going to see this as gender bias, perhaps view it even as sexist and outdated. But this, at the end of the 19th century, if women dared to participate in what we would now, which was considered to be male activities, of course she was derided. You know, men held position of power, and they tended to prevent women from demonstrating any potential that would either equal or exceed their achievements. And Mina clearly does this. She's very clever, she's exceptionally able, but she manages to balance it because she does not present a challenge to the male position of dominance. She lets her husband be in charge. She lets Van Helsing be in charge. She lets the men be in charge. And therefore, she is worthy of their respect, and she's not threatening. So here, when Van Helsing describes her as our teacher, he's obviously, he seems to be raising her up on a pedestal, and in fact giving her the status of honorary man. And I think this could really be considered a turning point in her character development. Perhaps we can't really consider her a round character because she is very contrived, but as the characters go, this certainly shows that she has developed. And remember, she's come full circle because she was employed as a teacher right at the first, or teacher's assistant right at the first part of the novel. And then she becomes Lucy's companion and wife of a solicitor. Then she is her husband's nurse and companion. And she had once these ambitions of being a journalist, but hasn't had the opportunity to follow those ambitions or fulfill them. And instead, she's channeled her writing ambitions into her secretarial work, and she is therefore the one who is putting together this document. So we have this woman who's portrayed as a homemaker who adds a softening touch to this austere asylum. You know, she is sweetly pretty according to Seward, and perhaps, and also even described as having a kind of a sad countenance. Maybe because she's had to put her dreams and her aspirations on hold. She's had to look after everybody else. She's not been able to follow her dreams and her career aspirations. Obviously, she becomes the innocent victim of Dracula's vengeance, and in this phase of the novel, in this final bit, she's been relegated to watching, quote, brave men, unquote, battle on her behalf. She's been unable to participate. And this, as you can imagine, considering she's such a brave and gallant woman, must be grating. Yet still, she because she's so brave and because she's so gallant, she's able to move from being a teacher to the ideal personification of Victorian motherhood and back again. So despite the fact that she can't chase after her own dreams, she is the epitome of, or she's portrayed as the epitome of what all Victorian women should strive to be. Is that enough? I'll let you decide. So they go off and they buy resources, they even arm Mina. And again, this is when we look at this woman who's so gallant and so brave. But she says she cannot carry one arm that the rest do. The scar on my forehead forbids that. As a result of being marked by Dracula, she is unable to carry a crucifix like the rest of them. So she is missing a layer of protection. We then move on to Jonathan Harker's journal, Darkness Falls. Again, stereotypical Gothic supernatural stuff happens at night. Harker and Godalming are going by boat. They get to question a number of captains of other boats all the way up and down the river. And they find out that somewhere is a large launch a boat with a double crew, and they are traveling ahead of them. So they keep up pursuit during the first 3 days of November. So that's what they are doing for the first 3 days. Seward and Quincy are on horseback, and they are traveling by road. Snow seems to be forecast, and of course Seward knows that Arthur and Jonathan, as a result of the cold and everything else, that Arthur and Jonathan's boat is in difficulty, and everybody seems to be making extremely slow progress, which again builds tension, creates frustration. Mina and Van Helsing, however, have arrived at Veresti on the 31st of October. Van Helsing hires a horse and carriage to take them the last 70 miles. And Mina spends some time again fulfilling a traditional role of the loyal Victorian wife, as she prays and writes in her diary about how much she loves her husband. So Mina is this combination of femininity and masculinity, but when she expresses her love for Jonathan, and generally when she talks about her emotions, she's not over the top. She tends to be rather restrained, and I think perhaps you need to consider whether or not she's displaying purely emotional love with a lack of physical reality, or if this is not the case. And again, that is something for you to think about. She ends off her journal entry with some relatively long sentences. He alone knows that what may be, and I pray him with all the strength of my sad and humble soul, that he will watch over my beloved husband, that whatever may happen, Jonathan may know that I loved him and honored him more than I can say, and that my latest and truest thought will be always for him. So we've got these closing lines which demonstrate Mina's devotion to her husband. It's a little trite, but she knows she's risking her own life, and as they get closer and closer to Castle Dracula, it becomes more and more concerned for her husband. I think because, of course, she's also being reminded of the fact that her husband went mad following, had a nervous breakdown following his last trip to Castle Dracula, and I think that's probably preying